Hey everybody, I am your host David Breer and welcome to Fintech Insider On Air episode 25. Thanks very much for joining us back this week. We had a bunch of people watching last week, which was great. I missed, but I heard that Ross did a really good job. I'm not sure if you caught that one.
No, I was out as well last week.
Yeah. I haven't got round to watching it yet, but I will go and do that.
It's on my list.
I mean, I've got my job back this week, which is good to see. So I think Ross did a good job, but not good enough that I got kicked off full time, which is good. And this week I'm back hosting with Mrs. Sarah Kachansky. In fact, Miss Sarah Kachansky?
I prefer Ms.
Ms. Sarah Kachansky.
Yeah.
You got to get these things right. And we'll be talking this week about money and mental health. There's been lots of, articles on articles lately in terms of different people's kind of views on where we're going, and I think some cause and effect stuff, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit. But to discuss this with us, we have somebody who knows, a lot more about it than probably I do. Bailey Kursar. How's it going?
I'm really good. I'm really excited to be here. This is such an interesting podcast and live stream to be on. So yeah.
Well, let's see where you are in 20 minutes. Like, if you're still saying that, we're very friendly, but we were just saying, like, last time I saw you was like 3 years ago in an IBM conference, which is like kind of weird that time has passed that quickly, right?
Exactly, and your memory is way better than mine, so well done on that.
Which is, scary. Again, I can't remember what I was doing 2 days ago, but I can remember where we met last. It's kind of bizarre. So, you've been up to some super interesting stuff in those last 3 years. So, Toucan, fill us in. What is it and what are you doing?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders of Toucan. We are trying to solve a really important problem and building a money and mental health app.
Ooh, very relevant.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Really relevant, which is good. And we're solving two really important challenges that are different but connected. So first off, there are millions of people out there who need extra support with money management, and they are looking for those things out there, and they're not finding good solutions on the market. And that might be because of mental health problems, it might be because of other accessibility issues. And then on the flip side, you've got banks and other regulated firms who are at the moment seeing this much growing spike of people coming to them with mental health issues, and they don't really have good processes or product to give those people. So we're trying to fit in and deliver the product, but also work with regulated firms in order to help them deliver better product.
And how does it work? How does Toucan work? What do I do with it?
Yeah, so we're really early, just caveat. But our core principle is that we want to use data, someone's data, especially open banking at the moment, data in order to connect them with the right kind of support at the right time. And how the app works right now is that someone can link up to their bank account using open banking. They can select a few alerts around unusual activity on their account, and they can then choose to share that with someone that they trust in their life. So that's more often like a parent or a spouse, someone who can help be the guide or the coach around their money management. But in the future, we want to think about other kinds of support. So it's not just about the existing support services and network around someone, but things like what the bank can do, or what a charity could do, or even the NHS. So there's a lot of scope out there to deliver better support for these people.
Absolutely. And so what inspired you to start this? Because we talk about it quite a lot, and I actually wrote a blog about it a few weeks ago to coincide with Mental Health Week. But why go from, because you were previously at Monzo.
Yeah.
Monzo, we know are great at caring for their customers and considering factors like this, but why make the leap and start something like this?
Yeah, so I was there 3 years ago, which feels like a lifetime ago, as I was saying to David just before. But since then, I've done lots of different things, and the kind of link with Toucan right now is that when I was at Monzo, the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, this amazing research charity, they were getting started, and I happened to meet Polly Mackenzie, who started it with Martin Lewis. She came into Monzo, did some talks, and they've since gone on to do really exciting things together. But I kept in touch, so when I left Monzo, when I was doing other things, I was working as a product manager, doing really exciting but contract work with fintechs. And open banking was the thing that I was becoming good at and known for. And I kept thinking, there must be really interesting use cases for this technology that no one else is thinking about. And last year in particular was a really interesting one for me, because I went from, at the beginning of the year, working on a way of using open banking to help people who are less financially capable, so people who have low numeracy or literacy, and providing an app, it's just a hackathon thing, that could help those people. So at the end of the year, talking to people in charities who I was coming across in other parts of my life and saying, open banking, this is this amazing new tech that could really help you deliver better support for people that you help. And it all came together when Nationwide Building Society put a programme together called Open Banking for Good that the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute is a partner of.
Mm-hmm.
And I applied for some grant funding, and here we are. So it's been a weird road, but it comes back to mental health is something that is really important to me. You know, I've struggled with mental health in the past myself, people who I love have, and I know how much more we could be doing in financial services to support people who struggle with mental health. So yeah, Toucan is my answer to that.
It's your baby.
Yeah, and this last 6 months have been really exciting because we've got to work with some of the best experts in this field and people who really know their stuff, including the guys at the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. So it's been great.
So whereabouts are you in that process then? You say you're quite early right now, but like how early is quite early?
Yeah, we have an app which
I mean, that's a lot earlier than a lot of startups.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right?
it's pretty cool. So yeah, I started full time in January when I got the grant funding. I met my co-founder and she joined full time in April, and she and I, but mainly her, have been developing the app, and it's now ready to go. So we're going to closed pilot with our first version in 2 weeks. So that's where we're at. And the main things that we're working on apart from that are going out talking to regulated firms, particularly obviously Nationwide, seeing as they're our partner at the moment, and trying to understand their challenges as well, like thinking about what product we can deliver for them, and what kinds of use cases there are, because at the moment our app really helps people who have mental health difficulties around bipolar disorder. So like there's a lot more use cases I know out there, but we're just starting off with this really interesting but not very well explored like challenge. Yeah, so we can get into that if you like in a bit, but that gives you hopefully a high level of what we're up to. At the moment there's only 3 of us, head of design, myself and my co-founder, and we're hiring a couple more people right now. So
Well, what type of stuff are you looking for? Because there's going to be a bunch of people watching this who might be the type of people you're looking for.
yes, plug alert. Okay, so we're looking for a head of operations, and if you go on our Twitter, which is @Toucan Talks, you'll see the job spec. And we're also looking for a back-end engineer. Both are going to be really crucial to the next 6 to 12 months of building the company. So yeah,
If you're interested,
get in touch.
Very, very good.
You know where to find us.
Well, I think to your point, actually, there's, mental health is such a broad topic, and actually, like the amount of people, both from a physical number, but the percentage of the population that are impacted by this in one way or another, either directly or indirectly, is really, really significant. So, just kind of looking at some of the stats, so mental health problems affect 1 in 4 people, which is amazing. You know, like that's something that people are kind of carrying around with them on a day-to-day basis that people around them have no context of. Nearly half, so that's 46% of people who are like super anal on stats, of people in debt also say that they have a mental health problem. 86% of respondents to a money and mental health survey of about 5,500 people experienced mental health problems and said that their financial situation was making those problems worse. 72% of respondents to Money and Mental Health survey said that mental health problems had made their financial situation worse. So there's a weird
it's a vicious circle.
cause and effect thing here. I mean, what's going on here? Like, is this a problem that's worsening? Are we getting better at actually understanding the signs of, worsening is definitely not a word before you pick it up.
I wasn't going to.
Yeah. Is this a problem that we're getting better at knowing the signs of, therefore can classify and face into better? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm sure you've got, I know you've written about this, so you'll know as well, but there's, I think, 2 key things happening. One is that as the taboo breaks and as people know a bit more about mental health, they're more comfortable talking about it, including with their bank and with people who are surveying people about mental health.
I think people also, actually, to add to that point, are realising they have mental health problems, or maybe it's something that needs addressing, which they just thought was normal.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of the key things that, the kind of red flags that you might see when you're experiencing a mental health problem around money, you might not necessarily think of as, I'm going to now go to my doctor and seek help specifically about mental health. And so I think we're now getting a better picture of what those struggles are, and people are putting their hand up and saying to their bank, listen, I need extra help with this.
Yeah.
So I think that's one part of it. And then I think the other part of it is driven by regulation and changes in the industry. So Monzo is a good example of a product that's come out recently and forced a lot of people in more traditional financial services to see, wow, we can do things differently. We can build product better. We can think about use cases that aren't like the majority in the mainstream. And I know from having talked to people in lots of different banks that that's making a big impact. And the regulator is also a big part of that. So the Money Mental Health Policy Institute, a lot of what they do is go and speak to people at government level and FCA and say, look, this is what the research says, here's what you should be doing and the guidelines that should exist. And they've been really successful in getting some great policies off the ground, which has then made the banks have to rethink a lot of what they're doing. So it's a really interesting time to be doing things in this space.
Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, but at the point where it's literally 25% of people walking around, it's not a niche.
No, I mean, I think that so we talked to when I was doing my blog, I talked about Monzo, and they have a special vulnerable customers team, which is excellent, and more banks should have that. But not everybody is vulnerable is the same bucket as having a mental health problem that needs some help occasionally. So as you say, 25% of your customers is a huge amount of customers. So, you know, I wonder if, whilst Toucan is speciality and targeting a specific demographic, and I know you said you have plans to grow, but is this actually something that should be baked into all financial services products?
Yeah,
should
absolutely.
all financial services products be, you know, built with the understanding that any one of their users might at any time need some help?
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely where the industry needs to go, and is going, to be fair. So vulnerable customers teams are the norm, or teams that might not be called that but have similar titles. Monzo's is really interesting because of how they structure it, and it's a product team squad in the same way that they have a lending, you know, people in the credit department or people thinking about overdrafts, and so they really have brought that up to a level that is as accountable and responsible as other parts of the product. And I think other banks are trying to emulate that now, which is really interesting. The stat actually is 25% of people in any given year. So if you imagine, to your point about like someone can be going into a crisis and have that as a temporary thing, but just something that really impacts not just their finances but their whole life. And if you guys have ever had an issue, you know, whether that's a health issue or job loss or bereavement or something that's really impacted your mental health, you'll know how that can get you into this tunneling mode of like, I can't actually focus on anything else. So if you imagine the millions of people out there who are in debt or are unaware of the financial services options that they should have, the fact that they're dealing with this thing over here means that they're limited in terms of how much attention and time they can spend sorting the finance stuff out. And as you pointed out, it's a cycle, because you can then spend time over here worrying about other things where the debt is getting worse, and that in turn impacts on your mental health. So it's really important for everyone to understand what we can do in order to stop that cycle.
Yeah, I guess you know, not wanting to turn this into too much of a love-in for challenge banks particularly, but I mean, is this not just a problem? I mean, aside from general life, is this not just a problem with the business models that financial services have got? Because, I mean, if you're a business set up in a circumstance where essentially you're built on lending, i.e. getting people into debt, and that's a trigger and a spiral for at least 25 to, you know, to your point around people coming in and out, 25 to 35% of the population for mental health problems, then, I mean, this is a weird problem that the financial services industry is essentially creating for potentially 40% of the population of the UK. Like that seems like a weird, like, how do they get out of that? I know there was a question a second ago that popped up from Kevin about, you know, what's our thoughts on the money saving expert LBG, something that's been signed up.
Yeah, it came out this week, didn't it?
Is this a good step towards that? Or,
Yeah,
I mean, we see a lot of big banks doing TCF style, like, here's a policy, but we're not really doing anything. Like, is this something we're actually really seeing big banks do something about? And if so, is that them changing their business model fundamentally, or is it less severe than that?
I mean, I guess it depends which element of the bank you're talking about. So, you know, people.
I think particularly lending. I think
Yeah.
that seems to be the crux of most of the problem, right?
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. I think when you're talking about debt, then lending can be part of the problem, and particularly if you're talking about not necessarily banks offering loans and overdrafts, but also when you go back to your point, like banks essentially have a complete picture of the person they're lending to, so they might have other debts in other places that they don't know about. But for me, actually, and this is where the Lloyds and the money and mental health policy tie-up is so important, is actually about communication. So if you improve the way in which you communicate with your customers, a lot of this can be overcome.
Yeah.
So one of the things about lending, which I read about actually from Monzo again, was about this idea of offering people breathing space. So as you were saying, somebody who is in severe debt gets into a tunnel and that's all they can think about and they can't ever concentrate on anything else. What this idea of breathing space is that you tell your bank that you're in trouble with debt. Now they should know you're in trouble with debt. And they go, okay, well, we're going to have an agreement where for 4 weeks, or I believe it's 4 weeks, we're not going to contact you about that debt. You have 4 weeks when we're going to stand back and we're not going to like cancel the debt, but you have a timeout to go away and say, right, I need help. What can I do? Seek appropriate treatment. Yeah. And that's about being able to, you know, on the one hand, reach out to your customers, but also from making your customers feel like they can reach out to you. And you know, the other point about communication is kind of making sure that you actually have a better idea of who your customer is. Because to your point, I don't actually think it's about lending per se that's the problem. I think it's the business model banks have where they see dollar signs or pound signs and not people.
Yeah.
And that's how they contribute to this. That's my perspective on it. But
just thinking about it purely from a I don't want to be like, hi, I'm the capitalist in the room, but purely from a business sense, people defaulting on debt doesn't make good business.
Absolutely.
So being in a situation where you work with people to manage them through, for whatever reason, through good communication, definitely in this case, because it's going to lead to more of a kind of a spiral. But it's like people kind of like don't get good culture leads to better productivity. Like good communications leads to better outcomes for the consumer, but also for the businesses, right?
Yeah, I mean, and how much? I mean, presumably your product helps with this, but again, how much do banks actually know about their customers?
Right, and there are a lot of these issues. So let's go back to a couple. Just off the top, people might not know about the Lloyds and Money Policy tie-up. So it is this really exciting thing called Mental Health Accessible Standards, and it's a new project that has come out of the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, and they have led on it. It's been funded by Nesta. And it is, as it says, documented standards in terms of what is expected from financial institutions around how they deal with people with mental health issues. And Lloyds is kind of the pilot user. So the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute are going to instigate a kind of check of Lloyds' entire service. So although there is a really good collaboration there, and I completely applaud Lloyds, they've done a lot of good work in order to make this happen. It's something that can be applied across the industry and really should. So there are 3 bands of
is it guidelines as well? Is it kind of like a stick to this framework and you're doing better already kind of thing?
There's guidelines, and there's kind of 3 different awards or badges that you can earn, and you can like be I can't remember what they're called, but you know,
gold standard, silver standard, whatever.
Exactly, and
it's very, very similar how it's set out to DDA standards for accessibility, essentially,
exactly.
Which Lloyds have actually got a very good track record of. I think Graham Whippy, who's over at Lloyds Banking Group, who both played a part in writing DDA, has actually been part of implementing it there as well. So they've got a good track record of pushing these boundaries a little bit. Yeah.
And they really care about mental health. It's one of their big issues that they're pushing on.
I mean, just to get back to capitalist point and pick up on that, if your customers have got good mental health, they're going to be better customers. So surely you want to help them get into that position.
Yeah,
it does make sense, doesn't it? But it's I guess it's that making sense and then knowing how to help or what to do, which I guess is to your point around triggers. And I guess given mental health is such a bucket of 1,000 different types of problems that people can have, like say from a bereavement to like very severe bipolar disease. So I mean, knowing those triggers through transactional behaviour, is this something that you're trying to sort of look into with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And the banks are doing this too. So there's a consultation going on at the moment with the FCA around how banks and other lenders can look at transaction data, and in the same way that they might now look at for fraud patterns, and use data science and algorithms to do that, actually trying to think about how they might do that for different kinds of vulnerability. But as you can imagine, there are lots of issues that come up when you start thinking about vulnerability. And to go back to your point about capitalism, I think it is either a very real threat or a threat in terms of the perception from customers and consumers everywhere, that if I disclose my issue, whether that's
Absolutely.
mental health issue or any kind of vulnerability, that's going to have some larger knock-on effect on my credit history, my credit file. It might have a knock-on effect on how my bank treats me and the level of respect they give me. And people with mental health problems are like every one of us, it's like, actually, I don't want to be talked down to and patronised by my bank, and I don't want to then have this like black flag on the file or whatever it is, so that in the future, if I want a mortgage or I'm in a better place, I'm going to be impacted by that. And so that's part of the issue that the FCA and a lot of these firms are dealing with at the moment. But you're absolutely right in terms of the bigger picture. If everyone can support these people better, they'll be financially better off, which in turn helps
everybody else.
In turn, yeah, exactly. So, and just to kind of go back to the original point that you were making around challenger banks versus legacy, this is still an issue for challenger banks because of the business model that they have, right?
Sure.
And I think they're doing really good things around the culture and putting it first with a lot of the work they're doing. But it's something that as an industry we're going to have to deal with and figure out. But here in the UK we've got really good guidelines, good regulator, so hopefully we'll lead the way.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah. I think what you were just saying there made me think that there's actually, so banks have a trust issue, whichever bank you're looking at, there is still a certain segment of the population that just doesn't trust the banks to be acting in their best interests, whatever that might be. But I think added to that, or sort of compounding that, is a lot of people who suffer from mental health issues suffer from guilt. A lot of people feel it's their fault somehow, it's my fault, I've done something wrong, this is why I'm in this situation. And again with people in debt, so if you're suffering from a mental health problem and you are also in debt, then you are going to feel incredibly guilty a lot of the time, it seems most likely. And on top of that, you've got a trust issue. So my point being, it's hugely emotional, it's hugely emotive. And I wonder how we can make sure that when banks are addressing it using technology, they're still maintaining that kind of empathy. Because if you're going to be dealing with people who are in that state that they need, technology can help us do so many things. It can help us do wonderful things, but also there is the element where in some points you do still need the human touch. And I wonder if you have any ideas on how you maintain that balance.
Yeah, I mean, because we're an outside firm and there's only 3 of us, essentially we're a very quick-moving product development team. Like, my background is in marketing and product. I have a co-founder who's an excellent engineer, and we have a designer. And we have based everything that we've done so far off research. We've done 25 interviews with people who have financial anxiety and are also on lower incomes, and that was incredibly helpful, painting the picture type research, giving us the background of the story. And our work with the charity has meant that we've come into the lives of lots of people who are actually using really risky workarounds to get this kind of support that they can't get from their bank. So, for example, asking their parent to log in as them using their online banking credentials, or their spouse. And that can be really risky. You can open yourself up to financial abuse. So research has to be at the start of all of these conversations. And I think, again, it's a culture point. Like, some of the new banks might be quite good at bringing research in at a certain point. Other banks might have some way to go. But as our business model really is about helping deliver some of that for regulated firms. So research and design is going to be really core to what we do forever. Yeah. It's going to be. I love doing research. It's like one of my favourite things to do, and I find it really fascinating. Like, actually talking to people about the apps they use and the money management strategies they use.
And to that point, that we know about empathy, people like to be listened to. So, if your bank sends you a survey that says, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z, you're probably going to go, the bank's never going to listen to me. It doesn't matter what I put in here, I can put anything I like. But to the point about, getting research done and getting accurate research is making people feel that they can say something. And again, that I guess that feeds back into how banks should manage this. How do you prove that you're listening?
Yeah, I think your point around trust, I think, is really important in this, because banks and the relationship between banks and consumers right now is at a point where consumers think banks will use the data that they have on them against them. You know,
not for them.
Yeah, me showing some sort of form of weakness will be used against me, and my APR will be higher, and blah, blah. So like I think it does come back to like the fundamentals of the relationship between big financial services organizations and, you know, the humans that use their products, and that's a really hard thing to change. And to be honest with you, it's like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about with regards to mental health in terms of the ways in which to address it are very similar for any more niche problem that banks are facing into. I mean, their inability to really deal with wealth management correctly is because they can't do controls and frameworks and everything well. They can't do child accounts very well because they can't do sub-accounts and controls and frameworks very well. So there's a real like lack of, I mean, mass market seems to be, you know, well catered for, but being in a situation where anybody's got any additional requirement for humanity, as you said, or, I mean, it's a low bar, isn't it? Like, speak to me like a human seems to be like a low bar of service. But, I mean, is this just a broader view of, like, big financial services organisations needing to change more dramatically than, or maybe quicker than they are?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. But I'm optimistic because I think what we've seen over the last decade as fintech firms have emerged and started partnering with legacy firms, you do see people able to make these decisions and move quickly and deliver product without all of the bureaucracy or the slow-moving nature of a large bank. So I think there's a really exciting opportunity for Toucan and for other players. There are other people looking at these kinds of issues as well in fintech.
Well, and I guess like somebody like Nationwide, you know, community bank, you know, building society set up as a community vibe. This very much kind of aligns to, you know, doing good by doing good type narrative, which I think makes a lot of sense for those guys.
Yeah, they've been amazing. So we're very lucky to have had that relationship from day one. However, from our point of view as a mission, we want to be able to affect as much change as possible, and that's about working with a lot of different partners, not just working with Nationwide Building Society. But yeah, building in more of this ability to talk to customers from the off, and then thinking about how products and services are designed, thinking about the language that's used, and really considering some of the barriers that people have. And you know, I was just saying at the beginning, you know, sometimes these barriers are associated with people who have mental health problems, but actually we all have them. So things like, oh, today I just feel like I can't lift the phone up and talk to my bank. It's just something that I can't deal with today. And that communication preference then becomes my kind of accessibility need, if you like. And maybe having a chat on an app or a different way of contacting them would mean that my voice is heard, right? And that's just one example of how, you know, I think if we build better services for these people, it can affect large groups as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to point out that a lot of what you just mentioned isn't reliant on technology. So we're talking today, and we talk quite a lot about how technology helps you manage financial services. It's fintech, for goodness sake. But a lot of those principles you've just discussed actually can be baked in and embedded throughout the bank, and that helps those customers who don't use technology. Because I think we also have this tendency, or sometimes I do, to lose sight of the fact that there are a huge group of people out there who just wouldn't ever use an app because they don't know what an app is, or they wouldn't ever use a live chat. You know, their actually own communication with their bank is via a person in a branch, because for whatever reason that's the only channel they have. So it sounds to me that we can use this as like a stepping off point to like push backwards into the rest of the bank and say, you know, yes, communication staff should have this training, whether that's in branch, on the telephone, via, you know, even the language of text messages, if you're still sending SMS, that kind of thing.
Is this something, here's my ignorance stepping in. I mean, it's been, 20 minutes, I knew it would rear its face at some point. But is this something that's better dealt with in other countries? I mean, like, we're all quite British. Like, British people are pretty bad at, like, dealing with,
emotions,
like, speaking to other people, emotions, you know, talking about money, talking about mental health. It's like a multiplier effect. We're bad at talking about money, we're bad at talking about mental health.
Yeah.
Like, America, people are a lot more comfortable having either seeking help through, you know, psychiatry or whatever, or actually just talking to other people about things. Like, is this just us in England that's having this problem?
It's a really good question. I actually don't know that much about how this is handled in other countries. What I do know is the same EU directive that's pushing for more regulation along vulnerable customers is, you know, obviously going to affect the whole of the EU. So it'd be really interesting to go and have a look at how other countries are dealing with this and what the best practices are in banks there. My sense is that partly because of the Money Mental Health Policy Institute, which has only been around for 3 years, but their work has really had a big impact, and I can see how people in the industry are talking about it more, and I think I would hope that we're leading the way. But yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, if anybody knows of anything outside the UK, I know that, and we talked about before, that Spain has some very unconventional and not particularly helpful practices when it comes to debt collection.
Yes.
Which I don't know if you know about.
I don't know.
I actually thought it was. I think I said this to you before. I actually thought it was a historical thing, but
and also a joke.
And also a joke.
Yeah.
But it's apparently in Spain they basically try and shame you into paying back your money.
I've heard this, yeah.
And sometimes, rare occasions, but that can result in somebody who dresses in fancy dresses and follows you around as you go about your day-to-day life to try and shame you into it. Now, I don't think that's widespread, but I think it is an example of...
It sounds funny and also horrific.
Yeah.
It's like a Black Mirror episode.
It is.
Like that thing.
But as an example of how financial services have behaved in the past and have contributed to this problem, I think that goes to show it's definitely not just the UK where financial services haven't been the best at dealing with this. But I'd love to know if anybody else is out there doing similar things.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess with banks moving more and more into, like, say, either community or being in a situation where they're actually creating more and more services. I guess this is in the broadest sense of inclusion, this is going to be a trend we're going to keep seeing more and more of people like diversifying away from just mass market, right? Again, it comes back to like the capitalist in me is like, this makes just good sense for people to do these things. Like, they should do it, but also they will benefit from doing it.
Yeah.
Therefore, I mean, if somebody can come up with a good reason, then we'd probably like to hear right now. Right?
Yeah, but I do think there are lots of interesting challenges, ethical, in terms of how the data is stored, what parts of the bank know what, And I think banks are very on top of this, or at least thinking about it. But
there's so much sensitivity there as well. So like, actually the, like you said, this isn't any person when I ring up the telephony centre gets a flag that says there's this tendency in my payment behaviour or whatever. You've got to be so careful about how you not just from a sensitivity in terms of handling it, but just legally. Like, banks can get themselves into real tricky situations, which is probably why many of them have strayed away from doing anything about it.
It hinders their ability as well so they can very freely use this technology to, as you mentioned, detect fraud. Nobody is concerned that they are using technology to track behaviour, spending patterns, to track fraud. But the minute they say we might use it to spot unusual payment patterns and attach that to a particular what you mentioned, personality disorders or health issue, then all of a sudden it's the same technology, but it's a totally different set of conditions.
Yeah. So the real challenge, I think, and I've never worked in a legacy bank, so I'm probably making some assumptions, but the real challenge, I think, is that this technology is being used, right? They do look at transaction data and put people into buckets in order to think about whether they should lend to that person or what that person's likely interest rate should be, or whatever it is. However, they don't put labels on that model or that pattern so that it links up with the vulnerability work, right? And that's a wall that needs to exist, because if for any reason you spotted, so bipolar as an example, because it's fairly clear where you see transaction patterns where someone goes into a manic episode and starts overspending. If you spotted that and then attached a note to it and said, we shouldn't lend to this person, you can imagine like how difficult that is, versus actually what is happening now, where someone might look at that person, put them in a bucket of let's not lend to this person, but they don't put the label on top, and they don't think about what support or there is no. It's a very difficult ethical challenge. Like, how do you proactively give that person support?
And it's hard, isn't it? Because I imagine as a consumer, it's my money, right? So limiting and this is to your point around the provisioning of third parties to have more sort of controls over the accounts. It becomes a really difficult thing to kind of manage, doesn't it? Like, the only thing I can actually ever remember about Stephen Fry's book was he went into manic episodes, spent 20 grand on a thing and then 2 days later realised he did it. When you're Stephen Fry and you can afford to spend 20 grand, like you're like, oh no, like I'll write another book or something. But I mean, normal people, like you're in like real trouble for a long period of time.
Well,
Right?
I think that's the point that I was just going to make is that we're talking about somebody who is currently suffering mental health problems, but also what about all those people who may have had problems in the past that have not been addressed, so they've gotten themselves into terrible debt 20 years ago because something happened that was either a mental health crisis or caused that, and now they still can't get a loan. How do we open this conversation up wider to somebody and say, well, my financial history has been checkered, because it's true, if you do get yourself into a spiral of debt, the likelihood of you getting lent to again in the future, even if there was a cause for that particular problem, is not really addressed. So I think there's the broader thing here as well. We can talk about people for whom this is a current problem, but also for people who this has been a problem in the past. And how do we go about rehabilitating their financial health? How do we make it so that banks can understand that yes, just because this happened once, there were circumstances that mean it might not happen again, and this might be a pipe dream. But I feel like there's a whole group of people there as well who need. I
mean that sounds like a pretty hard question as well to put you on the
Right.
spot. Like how do we fix this? Like how do we right now? Yeah.
This is why I'm excited by this, because I am attracted to massive, scary problems, and these are really big, real problems that affect millions of people who, let's face it, aren't the top priority for most big, massive fintechs. Because go back to capitalism, they're not the place where necessarily you're going to be able to lend, or the money you can make from those people is maybe limited. So
I think perversely though it might be like not in a really predatory way, but if you're talking about debt consolidation and if you're talking about helping people manage out of a situation of default, I mean there's a business to be made there that isn't Wonga.
Well,
right?
you could have a business that lends to people who previously had mental health issues if you can find a way to do it in such an empathetic and business critical way. But
absolutely, and I think the way that these problems might get tackled is as part of a wider remit, right? So we've talked about Monzo a lot, but Starling, I'm sure, also doing a lot of things around this, as are some of the other challenges probably. So that's my hope. We can tackle it as part of a broader remit. I think though the ethical issues are really interesting, and it's part of the reason why at the moment how we feel at Toucan we need to create a safe space away from a bank. So our app at the moment uses open banking. It's completely separate to Nationwide's own app, and potentially in the future if we onboard people, they will have this as a safe space where they know they can talk to Toucan and our team, or we can deliver them support that is our own support. And if they want to share that back to their bank, they can, but they don't have to. And that's part of how I think we can start to tackle some of those issues. Because like I said, sometimes there are ethical issues faced by bank, but actually a lot of this is about perception because of how people might have lack of trust, but also these not really understanding necessarily the wider picture, and being scared. If you're disclosing this stuff, it can feel really scary. So safe space is really important. I'm sure there are lots of other apps that could exist as well to be that safe space, but that's what we're doing at Toucan.
Well, I guess last 3 years ago there was nothing, nobody really sort of talking about this too much and nothing in place. 3 years later there's policy coming in, there's players like yourself coming in and actually attempting to do something. So I mean there's a lot of talk in other different areas of inclusion, but it's good to see people actually doing something in this space, so well done.
Yeah. And whilst we've talked about you today, you're by no means the only player in this space, are you? So there's a lot of people tackling a wide variety of different problems as well. So it's great. This is one of those situations where I think competition is a good thing.
And I doubt it'll be the last time we talk about it as well.
Absolutely
so
not.
Come back when you get a little bit further down the line
I
and let us know how it's
absolutely
going.
will. I absolutely will.
And we'd like your referral bonus if anybody has watched.
All right, on that note, that's all we have time for this week. Bailey, where can people learn more about you and what you're up to?
You can go to usetoucan.com, and we're on Twitter at Toucan Talks.
Wonderful. And you, Sarah?
You can find me on Twitter at Sarah Kachansky.
Fantastic. And for me, you can find me over on Twitter at David Breer. If you like what you've heard, or in this case, what you've watched, then join us again this time next week, where we'll be coming back and talking about another topic. I'm not really sure we know what we're talking about yet, but I guess if you've got any suggestions,
we're open to ideas.
Yeah, feel free to drop me an email on david@11fs.com. Thanks very much for everything. Bye-bye for now.